All right, everyone, I have to talk about Luna New Moon by Ian McDonald, a book that took me like a month to read, even though it's not super long. Oh my God, why was this book such a trial? Okay. So this is a science fiction book. It is set on the moon. And God, how do I even talk about it? Okay. I did not like the writing style. That's the beef I have with this, I think. And that's what made everything else so much more difficult to appreciate, and the book difficult to get through. He writes in a style with a lot of fragments, a lot of times just a couple of words, usually when he's describing something. And that's just kind of frustrating to read. He also, just each chapter was pretty long and switched between a lot of characters. And it was kind of interesting in that I would read a bit, which would be like a page and a half maybe, about a character doing a thing. And it would make a compelling little vignette. And then we'd move on. But I never felt that attached to what was going on plot-wise. And it's basically about this this family called the Cortas, who live on the moon, and they are one of the 5 dragons, which are these 5 families that have these businesses that they've started on the moon that basically run the moon, and they have the power and the money and etc. And the Cortas have a number of adult siblings who don't get along, and they all have very different personalities and just things that they're doing with their lives. And what do I say the plot is? Because it's kind of takes a while to get there. Okay, the plot is like Corta Helio, which is the name of their company, is always in rivalries with other companies, just always. And Mackenzie Metals is kind of a big one. And you find out partway through the book that the matriarch of the family, of the Corta family, is dying. And she hasn't told anyone yet, but you find out. And it's just kind of like who is going to run the company when she's gone, and will they do a good job? And also, then there's this arranged marriage thing that comes up, because like a lot of political stuff on the moon is between these families is done with arranged marriages. And but like the thing is that some of the stuff that I'm mentioning, when it really gets into the arranged marriage, which falls apart, and then there's a duel, and then everybody starts fighting, that's like the last quarter of the book. Like, it takes forever to get there, and there's a lot of setup, and there's a lot of other things that happen. One of the wives of a son of the family dies quite dramatically, and they believe that she was murdered by her family, her birth family, not the one she married into. So the Cortas are angry about that, of course, but it's complicated, and it's like, God, but I never cared enough, right? Like, this should be ridiculous rich people on the moon drama, and it sometimes is, but I never quite cared enough. And then sometimes I would almost care, but never quite enough. Look, okay, here's what I'll say for it positively. The world building is really interesting. I like the way the society is set up on the moon, and we get to see a lot of different elements of it, from like, here's the sports, and here are all of these different cities, and here's how the courts work, and they're like kind of insane. Instead of having laws, they just kind of base everything on contracts, and you can fight to the death if you want to. It's wild. And there's like 3 different chapters, I think it was 3, where the matriarch starts telling her life story to this religious woman who she's friends with, and, you know, is kind of trying to set down her story before she dies. And it's like this extended confession kind of scenario. And that was interesting, because you got to hear about how she came from basically nothing in Brazil up to moving to the moon, training to be there, and then there's like basically, because living in that low gravity environment weakens your bones and muscles, you reach a point where you can't return to Earth anymore, and so you can make the choice to go back before that point, but once you reach it, obviously you have to stay on the moon. And so like surpassing that point, there's this whole thing about this woman that she loved and who decided to go back to Earth, and all about how she met her husband and how he died, and she's convinced that he was murdered. And I liked all of that stuff. I also like how the society on the moon is very like, how shall I put this? It's not heteronormative. Like, practically everybody is some shade of queer, and their arranged marriages take place between any two people, basically. I mean, actually, disturbingly, they can take place between adults and children. But the arranged marriage that's like the center of that last quarter of the book is between two men, one of whom is the son of one of the sons of the Corta matriarch. And yeah, so there was a lot of interesting stuff in here. I think the whole reason I ended up hearing about it in the first place was because one of the main characters is asexual. She's never referred to as such, but she is referred to as similar things, and basically does explain that she's not attracted to people, and so she has this whole elaborate, like, very elaborate masturbation routine. I don't know why the book needs to go into this in detail, but it does. I don't know, just there's a lot of interesting technology. Like, a lot of that is very cool, but just took me forever to read. I just couldn't. Like, so I don't think I'm going to continue the series. It is a trilogy, which is too bad because I like the setting, but I felt like probably the matriarch was my favorite character, and she did die before the end of the book, so I will admit that the scene where she died, I teared up a little bit, but like, there were cool concepts, but for the most part, I'm just like, I don't know that I care enough to continue reading, so that's New Moon. Yeah. Right. I don't know why, but I keep forgetting to film myself talking about this book. Amazing. So before I forget, once more, I'm doing it. The Gene by Siddhartha Mukherjee. So I finished this audiobook like a little bit ago, a few days ago. I've been busy. But it was good. So it's a nonfiction. It's about genetics from Mendel to 2015, basically. And it was interesting. I mean, I learned a lot of this in school. And you know, for reference, I studied microbiology, so I've taken, you know, micro and molecular and all this shit. Like, I've learned how genetics works like 5 separate times. I know this stuff, you know. So, but it was really interesting to learn it kind of in chronological order of when things were discovered and how they were discovered, and more of the scientists involved. Like, obviously I'd heard of Mendel and Darwin, but most of the other people I hadn't heard of, and that was interesting. And he also puts in some stuff about his family, just like kind of his introductions to each of the sections, because he's got a family history of mental illness that's interesting. So, and then he also talks about his mother's identical twin sister and the ways in which they're the same and different. Like, I don't know, but mostly it's not about that, but that's just in there, like, and that's interesting too. I like the way he writes. I want to read his other book, which is the one on cancer, called The Emperor of All Maladies, which is a great title. And I've heard of that one, but someday I will read it. But yeah, like, genetics, it's really interesting. And I can't judge really how well a book would be understood by a general audience. when it gets kind of this like close to what I know, because I'll just be like, well, of course, it's perfectly clear. But then I'm like, well, maybe it's not though. I don't know. So I can't answer that question, but it was interesting. The stuff on genetic therapy, gene therapy, like, was really interesting. So I would recommend it if you want to learn about genetics, for sure. I think it's easy to understand and follow. I don't know if that's the way everybody's gonna feel, but I think it is. Like, he really explains everything, and having it, you know, in chronological order helps, I think. And it's also, I also thought it was really interesting to get some of the context of how, like, various people in different time periods, like thinkers and scientists, thought, like, inheritance worked. You know, from, like, the theory of the homunculus, which was basically that inside sperms are just tiny people, and we're just in there. I don't know how the fuck that's supposed to work, but okay. Because at that point, isn't it humans all the way down? You know, because, like, the tiny person, if it would have to have other tiny people inside it. And at some point, that becomes insane, right? But, yeah, all these weird theories, and you kind of look at it like, but some of them are just, like, completely nonsensical. Like, obviously, children often look like both of their parents, so why would all of the information be coming from one and none of it from the other? Like, that doesn't make any sense. So, I don't know, genuinely, maybe these Europeans needed to see more mixed race babies. Maybe that would have made it more obvious that both parents are giving, like, genetic information, whatever. Anyway, so that, whatever, that was really interesting. That's kind of early on, of course, in the book. And I liked learning more about Mendel just as a person as well. Kind of, like, sad that he wasn't really noticed in his lifetime, but cool to know that, I mean, basically everybody knows who he is now, and, you know, that's a hell of a legacy to leave. Why am I talking about this? It was a good book. Yeah. Gene, all of it. Every gene. No. But it was thorough, and it was very interesting. And I wonder what's happened in the last, 6 years that the book's missing. Because it was published in 2016. So, I'm curious. Maybe he'll write an update. I don't know. But I recommend it. When No One Is Watching by Alyssa Cole. I liked it a lot. I thought it was really good. It's a thriller. It's very heavily reliant on suspense and on it's kind of a slow burn. I just, want to point that out because I feel like the assumption going into a thriller is that maybe more would have happened and it would have been faster paced than it was. So there's that. But basically it's about this, not town, that's not right, this, like, neighborhood in Brooklyn that's getting gentrified, but it's all happening, like, incredibly quickly. And this character, Sydney, grew up there, and she's recently moved back and is watching all of these changes happen, and she's just, like, slowly suspecting that something is going on, like, beyond just kind of the usual ways a neighborhood changes. And then the story follows her, and then her perspective, and then the perspective of Theo, who is this guy who has just moved into the neighborhood in the building across the street from hers. And the two of them start to kind of uncover, like, some conspiracy. Yeah, it was really good. There were a lot of very just kind of creepy parts, and a lot of just, like, the futility of trying to fight against the change when it seemed like everything was conspiring against them, and there was like no recourse. Yeah. It also has kind of a love story type thing between the two main characters. But I don't feel like that's a spoiler. I think it's kind of obvious that that's what's going to happen from the beginning. Alyssa Cole writes romance novels, apparently, but I have never read them because I don't read romance novels. But this kind of reads like, what if a romance novel, but also a thriller? So it kind of has both. Which means, once more, I put myself through the exquisite torture of listening to an audiobook with a sex scene in it. Don't recommend. I liked the characters. I definitely thought some of it was a bit silly. I mean, okay, the main thing was that there's some stuff in Theo's backstory that I was just like, okay. And then the ultimate revelation of what's been going on. I think my issue is just because so much of the book is so realistic, the fact that there's so much kind of conspiracy theory stuff with what's been happening bugs me, because I don't like conspiracy theories in the real world. I don't think they're helpful or useful. But I think if the story had been less realistic, it would have bothered me less, but whatever. I did get kind of a kick out of how I'm trying to be vague. Oh my god, I don't want to spoil it, but how it resolved in the end in one way, but then in another way I was like, really? These guys claim that they control the government and the media and the and the police. So how is it that this one thing is enough to bring them down? I don't buy it. And I know that, I guess, it's not so much that they've been brought down in total, but just that their plans for this particular neighborhood have been stopped, but I still kind of don't buy it. And we don't find out really, what happens to any of the people who had moved into the neighborhood as part of this conspiracy. Did they just vanish? I don't know. We don't find out. But still, it was a really good book. And I hope that she writes more like this, because I enjoyed it. Yeah, for sure. The Burning God by R.F. Kuang. I just finished reading it. Then I cleaned all the tears and snot off of my face. Oh my god, this book. It was so good. It was so good. So this is the final book of the Poppy War trilogy. And there's more war, there's more gods and shamanism, there's more intense emotions and death and horrible things and just everything you expect for this series, and it really goes out with a bang. I think it's a kind of a obnoxiously on-the-nose quote from Game of Thrones, where the guy says, if you think this has a happy ending, you haven't been paying attention. And that's what this is. Oh god. She even warned us in the dedication. It says it's, oh god, where'd it go? Where's the dedication? Ugh, why can't I find it? Oh. To my dear readers, who stayed with this series until the end, and came prepared with a bucket for their tears. Yep, that's real. That's real. Oh my god, I'm so depressed. But anyway, it was so good. Just, oh my god. What can I even say? What can I even say? I mean, it's the third book in a trilogy, so I don't really want to go into super fine detail about what happens in it or anything, but a lot happens in this. A lot. It's long. And a lot happens in it. And, yeah. It was fantastic. I highly recommend this trilogy. And I really hope R.F. Kuang writes more. I don't know. More something. Something else, I guess. But something just as good. And I will wait with anticipation whether she does that or not. I mean, she's at Yale doing a PhD, so I don't know if she's gonna have time. But, you know, maybe. But anyway, you should read this trilogy if you like high fantasy and you like stuff that's kind of dark. It is pretty dark. And it's fantastic. So, I'm so sad. I'm literally, like, so sad. Oh my god. Anyway, also, like, I would read more in this universe. It's just a hint. I would read, like, a sequel series. I would. For sure. Yeah, alright. Enough of that. This was really good, and, I'm so glad I finally read it. Today I finished the audiobook of Oliver Sacks's book, The Mind's Eye. And it was interesting. I would say immediately I don't think it's my favorite of his books. That honor probably still goes to An Anthropologist on Mars. But it was good. So the focus of this book, like a lot of Dr. Sacks's books, is on a series of case studies almost, or essays about people who... Sorry, I don't know what... Sorry. People who have various neurological conditions that change their perception of the world in whatever way. And most of these had some relation to vision, a lot of them. And it was really interesting. I thought maybe most interesting was the first couple of essays because, let's see what you think I would remember this. It was only like a week ago that I listened to the beginning of this book, but okay. This woman just one day discovers that she has forgotten how to read. And she is also realizes that she's becoming incapable of, like, identifying objects by sight. It's really interesting because it really gets to the heart of, like, what it is we do when we recognize things. It's not that her eyes don't work, it's that something has gone odd in her brain that makes it impossible for her to identify things, including words. It's very interesting. And then there's also a whole chapter where Dr. Sacks talks about his own experiences losing vision in one of his eyes and what that was like. The audiobook's interesting because, like, there's a little introduction to every chapter, which is read by Dr. Sacks, and then the whole chapter that's about his vision issue is read by him, and then the rest of the book by someone else. But I've never heard him talk before. He's got such a funny little voice. He's kind of got a lisp. And she's got, like, I don't know, he sounds sweet. I really like Oliver Sacks, but it was a good book. It was good. It was. His books are always so interesting, like just the sheer variety of weirdness that can happen in the human mind, you know, and how what our brains are doing is so integral to, like, our comprehension of the world around us. Like, it's not just that your eyes need to be able to do all of their various jobs in order for you to see. It's like your brain needs to know how to interpret that too. So it's really interesting. Yeah. And nothing. It was good. Whatever.